Forget everything you think you know about how money passes between generations, because right now we are in the middle of what economists are calling the greatest wealth transfer in history.
That's right. We're talking trillions of capital on the move. It's going to reshape families, whole industries, even economies.
And if you're an investor or a business owner in South Africa, this really boils down to one thing. You're either ready for this transition or, frankly, you're heading for a serious and very expensive crisis.
That's the essential truth. And it's why just, creating a trust is only the first step. It's not the end of the journey.
So you've built the vehicle to hold the wealth.
You've built the vehicle exactly. Step one is done. But without thoughtful, proactive succession planning woven into the very fabric of that trust.
The rules, the governance.
The rules, the governance, the values, all of it.
Mm.
You've essentially built a powerful, custom-engineered car, but you haven't made sure anyone knows how to drive it when you're no longer in the driver's seat.
Okay, let's unpack all of this. Our mission for this deep dive is to go way beyond just, registering a trust deed. We want to get into the positive, the proactive, and the absolutely essential parts of having a robust trust structure here in South Africa. This is for you, the business owner, the investor, to make sure that your legacy actually lasts.
And we're going to focus on two really intertwined benefits that you get from smart structuring. First, immediate asset protection from the risks you face today. And second, the long-term continuity of not just the money, but the purpose, the drive, the values that created it.
Before we jump into the solutions, we have to look at the stakes. And the numbers, well, they're pretty sobering.
They really are.
Studies that track this stuff consistently show that roughly 70% of wealth transfers, that's 7 out of 10, fail to achieve what the original wealth holder wanted.
7% failure rate. It's massive. And it usually happens fast within 2 or 3 generations. There's this global pattern. They call it shirt sleeves to shirt sleeve.
I've heard that. The founder earns it, the kids enjoy it.
And the grandkids lose it. And what's really fascinating and kind of scary is that the failure is rarely because of bad investments. The assets are often fine.
So what is it then?
It's almost always a systemic failure, a complete collapse of governance, of communication, and critically, a lack of planning for succession and management.
Okay, so let's connect that 70% failure rate to the specific risks that South African entrepreneurs and investors are facing right now. Where are the gaps? What puts them at risk of becoming another statistic?
The gaps almost always come down to a lack of structural separation between personal wealth and business risk. We see it every day. Investment properties, the family home, they're still owned in a personal name.
So they're directly exposed.
Directly linked to the business risk. Or worse, the main trading company is holding a valuable property or the IP that it absolutely shouldn't be. And the big one-too-many entrepreneurs still sign personal sureties.
Okay, hold on. Let's define that because that piece of jargon is a massive threat. What exactly is a personal surety?
It's where you, the business owner, personally guarantee your company's debt to a bank, a major supplier, whoever.
So you're basically telling them, ignore my company structure.
You're intentionally bypassing the limited liability shield. That's the whole point of a company structure. But you sign that piece of paper, and if the business defaults,
they come for you personally.
Directly for your personal assets. It is the single most common way business owners expose their entire personal estate.
So one bad deal, one big lawsuit against the business, or even just a heavy SARS audit.
Any one of those.
And that single threat can punch right through the business and wipe out everything you've built, even assets you thought were totally separate.
Precisely. You have to have a legally robust structural separation. A firewall. That's what protects the long-term, low-risk generational wealth from the high-risk activity you have to take on every day just to run the business.
All right, let's shift gears. We know our listeners get the basic idea of a trust, but let's talk about how it functions. How do we take that legal concept and turn it into what you call the asset protection fortress?
Well, the transformation happens when you really grasp the split in legal ownership. We transfer assets from you, the founder, to a group of trustees. They then manage those assets, but only for the benefit of the beneficiaries. And the key part is this. Once those assets are properly transferred, properly vested, they are no longer legally part of your personal estate.
And they're not part of the business's assets either.
Not at all. That's the firewall.
Which brings us to this strategic trust company structure. This is the core mechanism of the fortress.
That's it. It is so powerful because the separation it forces. Your trust owns the valuable, low-risk assets, the property, the investments. Your operating company, on the other hand, carries all the day-to-day risk. The trading, the employees, the debt.
So you're separating ownership from risk.
Exactly. You shield the generational wealth from immediate business problems, creditors, lawsuits. And if something happens to you, the assets themselves are secure and still being managed.
Now, that legal separation is the shield. But we have to talk about compliance, especially with SARS and tax law in South Africa. People hear trust, and their minds immediately jump to high taxes.
It's a huge consideration, but it comes down to proper structuring. You're right. Income that's retained inside the trust gets taxed at the highest rate, which is a flat 45%.
Which is steep.
Very. And capital gains tax is effectively 36% in the trust. But the real efficiency, the game changer, is something called the conduit principle.
Okay, the conduit principle, that's the nuance everyone needs to understand. How does that work?
It means that if the income or capital gain is distributed to the beneficiaries in the same financial year it's earned, it effectively passes through the trust. It's conduited.
And it gets taxed in their hands instead.
Exactly. It's taxed at the beneficiary's personal tax rate. So if your beneficiaries aren't high earners, or if you plan the distributions carefully, this can be incredibly tax efficient. The goal isn't tax avoidance. It's about using the law efficiently to minimize things like estate duty and maximize what gets passed on.
This all hinges on doing it by the book, which brings us to a non-negotiable legal requirement in South Africa: the need for at least one independent trustee for family trusts. For a business owner who's used to controlling everything, that can feel like giving up power.
You can feel that way, I understand that, but it's absolutely necessary for the trust to be seen as valid under our law. The independent trustee ensures there's impartiality. They prevent conflicts of interest between the founder, the other trustees, and the beneficiaries. They're the check and balance.
And if you skip that step,
If you skip it, or you appoint your brother-in-law who isn't truly independent, the whole fortress could be challenged by the courts, by SARS, and it can be collapsed.
so giving up that little bit of control.
Is the price you pay for long-term legal security. It's non-negotiable. So if that immediate asset protection is your first line of defense, then succession planning is the long game. It's the offensive play. It's not just about transferring assets anymore. It's about transferring wisdom, responsibility, and a sense of stewardship.
And that failure to transfer wisdom is exactly why that 70% statistic exists. We saw this in a devastating way with the Harrison family case. The founder, Edward, he set up a significant trust, but in his planning, he only named one successor trustee, his eldest son, William.
Just one. It was a catastrophic failure of planning depth. Because when William tragically died before his father after a sudden illness,
And Edward himself was already suffering from cognitive decline.
the trust was left completely rudderless. There was no mechanism for administrative continuity.
What happened?
The whole thing spent nearly 3 years in legal limbo. The courts had to step in and appoint professional trustees. Capable people, sure, but they had no idea what Edward's original intent was. They didn't know the family dynamics.
And I'm guessing the legal fees were significant.
They consumed a huge chunk of the assets. And the bitterness and financial strain from that fight, it fractured the family permanently, all completely avoidable.
Wow, a total nightmare, and all because of a lack of depth in the planning. Now, let's contrast that chaos with a case where the values were actually baked into the structure from the start.
Yes, look at the James family. The founder, James, built his trust around strong values of entrepreneurship and self-sufficiency. Sure, he had the complex legal documents, but he also included specific, non-binding documents called letters of wishes. And he started annual family traditions that reinforce his philosophy.
So he wasn't just leaving them money.
He was leaving them a codified culture of wealth stewardship. And now, 3 generations later, that trust still actively reflects those values. It provides a safety net, sure, but distributions are weighted towards beneficiaries who show financial responsibility, who build careers, or start their own ventures.
The structure succeeded because the philosophy was transferred right alongside the capital. That's the key, isn't it? So how do we actually do that? How do we turn a static little document into that kind of living, values-driven institution? Let's start with trustee succession. It has to be more than just naming one person.
Absolutely. Robust planning means identifying multiple layers of successors, 3, maybe 4 deep, with alternates.
Yeah.
But even more important is establishing clear selection criteria. What kind of financial literacy do they need? What kind of temperament is right for your family? And you need a transparent mechanism for removing or replacing a trustee who's underperforming without having to drag the family through the courts for years.
Okay, that's element one. Number 2 is beneficiary preparation, basically teaching the heirs how to handle the wealth so they don't squander it.
Yes, or what I like to call stewardship literacy. The Morrison family did this brilliantly. They understood that turning 25 doesn't magically make you financially mature.
Right.
So in their trust, distributions weren't just tied to age, they were tied to demonstrated competence.
What did that look like in practice?
From the time the kids were teenagers, they were gradually brought into annual family financial meetings. They reviewed investment performance. They even helped make philanthropic decisions. So by the time they received any significant capital, they'd had a decade of exposure. They understood the mechanics, and more importantly, they understood the values and sacrifices that built it all.
Third, and this gets really tricky, is business succession within the trust, especially when the trust owns the operating business.
This is a massive failure point. You're intertwining legal capacity with operational capacity. The Reynolds family learned this the hard way. The founder, Michael, was both the main trustee and the CEO of the business.
The very common setup.
Very common and very dangerous. When he had an incapacitating stroke, the chaos was immediate. The other trustees had the legal authority to administer the trust, but none of them knew how to run the business.
So the business just drifted.
It drifted, they lost contracts, and massive value was destroyed while the family fought over who should be in charge. You must plan to separate those two roles.
And on top of all that, we have modern complications that just didn't exist 20 years ago. I'm thinking about digital wealth.
Exactly. Crypto, online businesses, digital IP, these assets can be worth millions, but they exist without a physical trace.
Secured by a password or a private key that could be lost forever.
Which is why the Thompson family case is so important. They didn't just name a tech-savvy advisor. They created a specific, legally binding protocol. It authorized and guided technically competent advisors to secure the founder's substantial digital assets the moment his death was confirmed. Without that specific proactive plan, millions in assets would have been completely inaccessible, functionally lost.
When you lay it all out, I mean, navigating SARS compliance, setting up
Right.
crypto protocols, managing family dynamics, it feels impossible for the average person to do alone.
It is. It requires deep, specialized knowledge across legal, tax, financial, and even psychological disciplines all at the same time. And that's precisely why engaging a professional trust consultant isn't a luxury. It's an absolute necessity for clarity and security.
They translate all the jargon into actual steps.
A good consultant does. They provide holistic support from the initial setup all the way to ongoing management, like a critical annual Fortress review to make sure your structure is still compliant as laws change.
It's about getting a strategy that's tailored to your specific goals, and crucially, to the South African legal and financial environment. You need someone whose whole focus is on creating that separation between ownership and risk.
That holistic expertise is exactly what specialists in this field provide. Someone like Lunka Sturman, a dedicated trust consultant and asset protection specialist, her entire focus is on giving that clarity and long-term security to South African business owners through these proven strategies. So if we just, circle back to the dual purpose of this deep dive, the conclusion is pretty clear. A properly structured trust is your defense. It protects your assets today from risk, but it's also the framework for transferring your purpose and your values to future generations. The value you get from reduced conflict, from guaranteed asset preservation, it far outweighs the cost and effort of planning.
And here's what I find really interesting. Succession planning is uniquely difficult, if not impossible, to do under pressure. Once that crisis hits, the illness, the lawsuit, like in the Harrison family story, your options just shrink and the costs go through the roof.
That's it.
The time to plan is now, when you're healthy, when relationships are strong, when you don't urgently need it to save you. That's when you can be rational and thoughtful.
So please, take that next step. Secure your financial legacy by getting professional guidance that is tailored specifically to the South African context. Don't leave your family's future to chance.
If you're ready to learn more about building your own asset protection fortress and securing your future, you can visit the website of trust consultant Lumka Sturman. It's www.lumkasturman.com. That's LUMKASTUURMAN.com. You can explore her specialized offerings there and really begin the journey to securing your legacy today.